Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Something different for this holiday season on the pod as I head into my 8th year of the Voice of Retail and prepare for the year ahead. A guest host crossover thought leadership insight bonus series of episodes from my award-winning Remarkable Retail podcast. This past summer, Steve Dennis and I released a series of 6 bonus episodes with leadership insights adapted from his newest bestseller, Leaders Leap. In the next 6 bonus episodes, Steve will unpack themes from his Leaders Leap and place them squarely and provocatively in the current retail context. Steve will be talking about how playing it safe is often the riskiest choice of all, what shifts are most important to focus on right now, and how we are often our worst enemies, and much more. Each highly digestible episode will highlight the key questions you need to answer for your organization to take the bold action necessary to transform at the speed of disruption. So follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcasts today, and brace yourself for a steady stream of wisdom, thought-provoking questions, and water cooler conversation. Remarkable Retail returns with Season 10 starting in January.
Clayton Christensen, the late great Harvard Business School professor, wrote one of the best business strategy books of all time. In his classic, The Innovator's Dilemma, he explains how successful companies often fail by becoming overly locked into their established business models and optimizing the heck out of them, and thereby ignore more risky, disruptive innovations. Of course, back in 1997, when Christensen's book first started to have impact, e-commerce was in its infancy, smart devices were a decade away, and cloud computing and AI weren't even glimmers in anyone's eyes. The speed of disruption back then wasn't exactly glacial, but it was far, far slower than it is today. Fast forward to today, and we are confronted with a new innovator's dilemma. Disruption is unrelenting, and the pace of change is often more exponential than linear. Take a slow and steady approach to innovation, and you may well get run over. Move with caution, and you may fall further and further behind. Right now, doing what we've always done, but just a little bit better, may feel safe, but it is often the riskiest path we could possibly choose. The evidence is overwhelming, and the verdict is in. Safe is risky, and more, fortune favors the bold.
Welcome to a special Remarkable Retail podcast summer series focused on what leaders need to do to help their organizations win the future and leap to higher ground. I'm Michael LeBlanc, and in this 6-part limited series, Steve will be unpacking key lessons from his new best-selling book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, available everywhere books are sold.
The reason God was able to create the world in 7 days is that he didn't have to worry about the installed base. That's a quotation I love from venture capitalist and entrepreneur Enzo Teresi. It's great because it does such a wonderful job of calling attention to the innovator's dilemma. As we see all the time, the seemingly safe thing for so many organizations is to keep doing what's made them successful, but just a little bit faster, cheaper, or with a few new bells and whistles. Sheets with higher thread counts. Sounds good. Salted caramel latte. Yes, please. Add a new vendor with an established brand name to the mix. What's not to like? But having the fastest horse in town doesn't do much good when the world has moved on to an entirely different mode of transportation. Yet the amount of energy that companies spend protecting the installed base is extraordinary. I've been in more meetings than I care to mention where the defenders of the status quo argued vociferously against investing in a new venture because of fears that it would cannibalize our core business. We can't afford to take that risk, they'd say. Of course, while we spent time twisting the dials on a decaying business model, our disruptive competition was peeling off our most valuable customers. Maybe we can't afford to not take that risk. Anyway, the uncomfortable truth is that the future is going to happen whether we choose to participate or not. And our choice often boils down to whether we wish to be disrupted or opt to disrupt ourselves. I start off one of the chapters in my new book, Leaders Leap, with a quotation from Graham Greene. Destruction, after all, is a form of creation. This lines up well with the oft-repeated Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things. Now, I'm more of a move fast and create stuff sort of guy, but regardless of your preferred aphorism, we have to see that our unwillingness to risk blowing up what we already do to compete with ourselves can, at best, keep us stuck, or, at worst, expose us to great risk over the longer term. This calls us to take a fresh look at how we think about risk, how we confront our fears, and how we decide to aim higher, move faster, and act more boldly. Any examination of retail companies that have struggled, stumbled mightily, or endured a mass extinction event will almost certainly show some form of risk miscalculation, often in the extreme. Competitors were underestimated, disruptive technology wasn't taken seriously, shifting customer preferences were dismissed as passing trends, or more likely, a mixture of all three. Look at many of the owners and operators of traditional enclosed regional malls. Decades ago, creating a destination location by assembling 100 or so leading national specialty retail concepts and 3 to 5 large department stores
Come see the softer side of Sears.
Was a killer idea, and over 1,000 such malls filled the sprawling suburban landscape. At the time, it was worth the drive and the hassle to see so much remarkable retail all in one place. But at the risk of stating the obvious, so very much has changed. And yet most operators of malls acted as if nothing was happening as their anchor tenants closed many hundreds of stores and dozens of specialty retailers filed for bankruptcy or disappeared completely. The size of many malls and the poor navigation seems almost laughable, and many tenants are unfamiliar or at least unremarkable. The food courts still contain all the usual suspects, and most still support the design aesthetic we'd recognize from an episode of Stranger Things. But at least you can usually count on getting a good parking space and a free sample of teriyaki chicken. To be fair, the well-managed top-tier malls continue to thrive, but many regional shopping centers are dead or dying. Was the safe thing to double down on a losing hand, to largely maintain the status quo? What we see with organizations is that instead of being afraid that they weren't changing enough, the leaders of many organizations were instead fearful of making a mistake, looking foolish, wasting money, or dealing with any other real or imagined boogeyman. So they took what they saw as the safe and sensible approach, doubling down on what they've always done or pursuing comparatively minor changes, what I recently heard referred to as infinite incrementalism. The result of this optimization approach is that once iconic brands are disappearing completely or facing greater and seemingly insurmountable challenges. This escalating commitment to a failing course of action can turn out to be quite risky indeed. As we see over and over, the penalty for inaction can be huge. The ultimate price for wait and see or deliberate and cautious can be irreversible irrelevance. At one level, this measured approach is understandable. Remember the time when an emphasis on deep analysis, extensive planning, and highly controlled processes would likely result in the outcomes we desired? Remember when we didn't have to tolerate all that much risk, when we could comfortably lean into the conditions that could likely guarantee success and ignore those that increased our chances of a major misfire? Remember how we could avoid adversity rather than accept that we often need to, as my colleague Sterling Hawkins advocates, proactively hunt discomfort. But as Tony Soprano once said,
remember when is the lowest form of conversation.
The truth is that in our hyper-global, hyper-digital, ever-faster-moving environment, success and failure are rarely far apart. And as Mark Zuckerberg has said, the biggest risk is not taking any risk. In a world that is changing really quickly, the only strategy that is guaranteed to fail is not taking risks. Sadly, though, for many organizations, the perceived pain of taking more risk simply outweighs the pain of doing what has always been done, but perhaps just a little bit better. Yet in the epic multi-year battle between team transforming for a new era and team defending the status quo, we can be pretty sure who will ultimately endure. So why is it so hard for companies to see that safe is risky? Why does the Department of No command so much power at so many retailers? Well, to make the leap from erring on the side of caution to accepting that our inaction may be the riskiest thing we can possibly choose, we must come face to face with resistance, with a capital R. Author Stephen Pressfield's concept of resistance, which he introduced in his iconic book, The War of Art, is the idea that there is a universal force that opposes creativity, progress, and growth. Resistance is the eternal force that holds us back from achieving what deep down we know we must do. It is the voice in our head that tells us we are not good enough, that we don't have the time, the talent, or the resources to pursue our dreams. As Pressfield sees it, resistance takes many forms, such as procrastination, self-doubt, fear, distraction, and addiction. It can manifest in our personal and professional lives, preventing us from reaching our full potential in all areas. Resistance is what keeps companies from trying new things in general and from competing with themselves in particular. Sure, if we do a deep dive into failed transformations or persistent lack of innovation, we will find plenty of errors in judgment, faulty assumptions, underinvestment, and poorly thought out or executed action plans. But I can tell you from my firsthand experience that we will also find lots of people, including me, who knew what needed to be done, but simply didn't do it. Why? It's all about resistance, which is fueled by fear. I might be wrong, I might look stupid, I might get ridiculed, I won't get my bonus or that big promotion, I might get fired. We've all heard that voice that keeps us stuck in a cycle of procrastination. We've all felt that rumbling in our stomach that tells us to slow down, be more careful. We've all felt the clutch in our throats that keeps us from forward movement. As Pressfield writes, the more profound the change stirring inside us, the more monumental and the more diabolical will be the resistance we feel. When it comes to the business world, it's hard to imagine any more profound change than letting go of a business model that no longer serves us or blowing up many of the ways we've always done things. We must acknowledge that resistance is real, that we all feel it, and that it will very likely show up when least helpful to making the leaps we must. Now, it is very much one thing to say that safe is risky. It is another thing entirely to change our relationship to risk, to hunt discomfort, to regularly go out on a limb. Because, as it turns out, most human beings are not exactly wired to take risks. Evolutionary biology has hardwired caution into our nervous systems. Much of this is driven by the amygdala, the part of our brain known as the lizard brain. This prehistoric part of the brain helps drive some of our base emotions, including fear. It's responsible for what you likely know as the flight, fight, or freeze response. This reflexive action is super helpful when you encounter a bear charging toward you, but not so much when it comes to the regular fears we have as leaders. We may not want to admit it, I know I didn't for many years, but as leaders, we are typically scared quite a lot. We are often expected to have all the answers when so much of the time we are fighting imposter syndrome. We are counted on to make decisions with incomplete information, and we get paid to place big bets on a highly uncertain future. Fear is real, and it is persistent. If we are rigorously honest, it is often the very thing that crushes our progress, that keeps us from taking the risks that can make the difference between leading our teams to remarkable results or keeping them stuck on the road to irrelevance. If we are to close the transformation gap, if we are to take the leaps that will win the future, then fear is the dragon we must name. Fear is the dragon we must confront. Fear is the dragon we must slay. Having worked in the innovation space for many years, I often find myself saying, so many dragons, so little time. Despite having some success slaying the occasional dragon, there have been many, many times when I've known what I needed to do and I just didn't do it. That damn dragon got the best of me. I was imprisoned by worry, and all too often I spent far more time decorating my cage than I did figuring my way out of it. It may be a bit hyperbolic to say that literally everything we want is on the other side of fear. But if you think you can make the leaps you must without confronting resistance and slaying that MFer of a dragon, well, you might be kidding yourself. André Gide is often credited, although apparently erroneously, as having said that man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore. And this has very much been my experience. In our journey to remarkable transformation, it is most decidedly not about finding the path of least resistance. It is about seeing risk in new ways. It is about being willing to sometimes lose sight of the shore. It is about standing at the precipice and being willing to leap. At the end of each episode, I offer up questions to help bring the concepts we discuss to life. Aside from answering these for yourself, I'd recommend discussing these with your colleagues and your leadership teams. Question number 1. On a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent do you believe your business must take far bolder action to remain relevant in the future? If you rated yourself 7 or higher, what are the 3 most important issues that must be addressed? Question number 2. What are the most persistent causes of your resistance? How might you slay these dragons? And I try to be as concrete as possible here. And 3, if you are rigorously honest with yourself, would you increase the odds of becoming or staying remarkable by taking on more strategic risk? If you said yes, what's keeping you from fully leaning in? I've included a Seth Godin quotation in many of my keynotes over the years. Seth says, "If failure is not an option, then neither is success." Next week, in our final episode in our special summer series, we'll explore the concept of failing better and discuss how to accelerate the pace of your transformation efforts. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to a special Summer Leaders Leap bonus edition of the Remarkable Retail Podcast, hosted by Steve Dennis and produced by me, Michael LeBlanc. Follow us wherever you enjoy your podcast, and don't forget to drop us that 5-star review. Safe travels, everyone.